Hey fellas, welcome back. Friends, we have understood the overall concept of Java Beans and we have checked a very simple web application as well. In there, we haven't talked about scope much. Today we will explore scopes in detail and we will try to understand what are different type of scopes and we will check them in action. This is the program from the last lecture and we have updated the name little bit. We have changed the name from username to username 1 and the scope is session, and we have also updated the name from setBean to set session bean. Alright, so let me quickly execute this program, and this particular program will set the value of the bean. So the output is done, and now I can execute get session bean by right clicking and highlighting the option run as and clicking on run on server option, and it will give us an output, and the output would be steady easy because we have updated the value little bit as well. So this particular thing is working properly. Now friends, this particular scope is a session, and session is dependent on the browser, and by default the timeout is around 10 minutes I suppose, and we can also override the timeout value of the Tomcat by adding an entry at our deployment descriptor, or in other words by adding a statement at web.xml. So now the scope is session, and if I copy this particular URL and open a new browser window, this is Opera browser. Let me open a new private window. Now the purpose of this private browsing or this private window is that whenever we close this particular window, all the cache and all the cookie will be truncated, and all the cookie related information would be truncated, and a fresh page would be opened next time. So now if I navigate to this page where we are trying to execute get session bean.jsp, then this is altogether a new browser. As a result, the value would be null, means the scope of session is per browsing session, means for a specific browser the session would be unique. In here we doesn't have the value steady easy because the session is not present in here. For example, if I navigate to get session now from this private window directly and execute, and then again I navigate to get session bean, then the value would be steady easy. Likewise, if I close this window and again open a private window, now as soon as I closed the window the cookie was lost, and now again if I navigate to get session bean.jsp, the value would be null for both the attributes. Now how the session scope works? Now whenever we make use of session scope, a cookie for these attributes gets stored in the browser, and obviously if we doesn't refresh the page within 10 minutes the cookie would be lost because session will expire, and the default time is around 10 minutes I suppose. So this is scope session. Let us proceed further now. Now let us proceed further and check application bean and check scope application. Now application scope is great. Why? Because this is not dependent on scope or anything else. If we set the scope as application, the particular property would be available throughout the application. For example, if I set the value and the output would be done, it is taking some time. Here we go, and then execute get application bean.jsp, and the output would be, so the output is first name steady, last name easy. And if I copy this particular URL and navigate to, again let us create a new private window and paste the URL on this private window, so everything is fresh in here, no previous cookie or anything. So even though this is a fresh window and altogether a different browser, the value of these property are saved, and we can check these value. So whenever we are in need of something which needs to be available throughout the application, we can make use of application bean, and The application scope is not dependent on cookie, obviously. So this is application scope, and proceeding further, let us check page scope. So let me open set page bean.jsp and let's get rid of all the other opened tab. So this is the scope page, and again here I have made some modification. The ID is username 3 and name for set property is also username 3. So this is all set, ready to execute page, and let me execute the page. So the output is perfect. Let me execute get page bean.jsp. Here we go. So the output is null null. Why? Let us understand. By the way, let me also show you all these get.jsp pages. These all pages are derived from our previous project, so these are exactly same. And let me also share these get page beans.jsp, get application bean.jsp, get request bean.jsp, and get session bean.jsp. All these pages are exactly the same and are copied from the previous project, and we are simply displaying the value. And all right, so let us get back to the project, and we were talking about page scope, and the page scope is pretty simple. The scope is per page, means whenever we are making use of this particular scope page, so the bean can be used on the same page only, and the scope is just the page. Now when we have set this particular value on this particular page, which is perfectly alright, but get page bean.jsp is altogether a different page. Now if I execute the get page bean.jsp, the value are not available, and which is perfect because the scope is page. But if I copy this particular content from here and paste it in here, and we will get rid of this text done, and execute the set page bean.jsp again, the output would be first name study, last name page. Why? Because we are trying to access these property, or we are trying to read the property in the same page, and the scope is page, and we can read these values in the same page. But when it comes to some other page, we won't be able to read those. So this is all about page scope. So let me close these all tabs, and lastly we will check request scope. Now the request scope is like only one time use. We can request this particular bean for only one time. Let me execute this particular program. In here we have set the values obviously, and we have requested also, and we have requested and updated these beans once. So now if I execute this particular get request bean.jsp by navigating run as and run on server option, then the value would be again null and null, for the simple reason that we cannot request more than once if the scope is request. Only once or only one time request is possible. Now we can get the values in this particular page if we can forward the request from this particular page. In that case, we won't be making the request twice, rather we would be forwarding the request, or in other words forwarding the same request to this page. So let us forward the request, then our work could be done. And for doing so, we will type in JSP :forward, and the page would be this get request bean.jsp. Here we go, and let me save the project. Alright, and let me quickly execute the program. Here we go. So now even though the URL is set request bean.jsp, we are getting the output from get request bean.jsp, and indeed the output is first name study and the last name easy. And the reason why, because we have forwarded the request to this particular page, and the request is only once. Whenever we make use of forward, the same request is being forwarded to the page. So this is all about the scope of these beans, and I suppose the explanation was easy. And these scope are pretty important when it comes to using beans, and when we work in large projects, usually we make use of beans and these things becomes important. So this is a good to know information and really important. I suppose the explanation was easy and you guys have understood what I was trying to explain. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.